everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we're going to be making the cap for Harvey the Hedgehog, which can be seen on his outfit here in this pattern from Lilly Rose Dolls. Now, we've already got Harvey pretty much made up. We made Harvey his head, his body, and we've made his trousers, his shirt, his waistcoat, and now his jacket. So the finishing touch is his cap. Now, it's normally around here that I'll say, well, Back to the Future, but I'm skipping ahead a bit, aren't I? You can tell I haven't filmed for a few days. First of all, thank you very much to Claire and Richard from Lilly Rose Dolls, forgetting my words, for sending me the pattern in order that I could bring these videos to you, these sew-along videos to you. And I think the feedback has been really great, so keep that coming. If you're enjoying my videos, then please let Claire and Richard know, because obviously that means then that I can bring you more in the future, which is what I hope to do. And if there's anything you particularly like to see, then please do let them know as well, or you can leave a message to me and I'll let them know, because then we can make sure that we tailor it for exactly what you want to make. I've got a few things in the pipeline already, but we'll talk about those later. So Harvey here is looking very dapper. He just needs his hat in order to finish this all off. And normally I would say, let's go back to the future, but look, I've got a prototype made already. So this one is in a brown brushed cotton fabric, which is for another character who is bodiless at the moment. So I've made another one of these in order that we can, I'm making a gift for Daniel. So in actual fact then, this is the hat as it's finished. Let me just show you the inside. So here's the inside of the hat, got that lovely contrast lining going on there. We've got this lovely peak on the top here, look, and then there's plenty of room for his head, and there's the detail at the sides. Okay, so yeah, they just push out nicely, so that's all flat. So I think that the instructions for these have had a few people confused, so I think that hopefully it's going to be very well received. So if you've been waiting for this video and you're pleased to see it, then please do let me know, because that always feels quite rewarding that I'm actually making what you want to see. So let's get on with it then. I'll turn the camera down and we'll get started. Okay, so when I was making this hat, there are a couple of places where it's going to feel counterintuitive to what you think you want to be doing. So this is definitely one of those things where you have to trust the process. And it's not very often I'll say that, but you're going to look at things and think, oh my goodness, what is she doing? But it will all come together, as you can see by this sample one. If you're a bit confused or you're not quite sure what is going to be happening next, then you can, well, I mean, some people follow along straight away. Other people I know will sit and watch a video through first and get their bearings with it and understand what they're wanting to, what they're being asked to do, and then they start that later. So whichever process is right for you, then, you know, just go with whatever you're comfortable with. But if you're a bit unsure or you've tried and it's not gone right for you, then of course, you know, just watch along first. And the video is going to be a little bit longer than it takes to actually make the hat, because I'm going to be stopping and explaining things, and there's a few things where you need to get the orientation right and understand where you are. But once you've actually got the actual construction nailed, I think you'll find these quite straightforward to make in the future, even if you've struggled making your first one. Okay, so with all of that said, then let me get on and we'll get the pattern out, which is the next thing. I'll put that hat down. So you'll need your pattern. Now, although I'm making the 16-inch, if whatever size of Harvey you want to make, the instructions will be the same. It's just the pattern pieces that are a slightly different size. So within your pattern, you'll need to turn to your pages for the cap. If I can just find those, I should have marked it earlier for you, shouldn't I? And we've got just 3 pattern pieces. And what you will see here is that I've been in and I've already added on my seam allowance around the outside of my pattern. And as the instructions say at the bottom here, add 1/4 inch seam allowance unless otherwise indicated. That's what I've done. And I've actually added the 1/4 inch seam allowance around all sides of all 3 pieces. So as you can see, there is a video on my channel about how to add seam allowance, but I use one of these, or you can use a tape measure. This is a seam gauge, but this just stays nice and straight. And then I measure 1/4 inch in from the edge and put a cut line for my pattern piece, little dash, as you can see I've got round here. And then I just join the dashes together, and that then gives me the 1/4 inch. Once I've got that, I'll take some tracing paper and I'll get a nice big piece and I'll lay it over the whole of the pattern, so over all of the page, and then I will draw around the cutting line, because remember the dark line that you'll see on the pattern is the sewing line. So I then trace that round, and then I'll cut out my pattern pieces, and then I use a paper pattern piece. I keep all of my patterns intact, so I don't cut up my copy, especially if I've had it through the post. If it's a PDF, you can argue that you could then cut it up, but I find the photocopier paper can be quite stiff to work with to actually pin to your fabric, and the tissue paper is much easier. But then also, if you lose a bit of your pattern, you can always go back to your so if you lose a bit of your traced pattern, you can come back to your master pattern, and then you can trace a new piece off again. And then I save all of these and keep these all intact for when I want to make them again, because I love the Lilly Rose Dolls so much, genuinely, that I am already going to be making a third hedgehog after I finish the second one that I'm making, but I need to not get ahead. But sneak tip, the Henrietta is coming soon, the videos for doing her clothes, because I've got one of my followers and Facebook group subscribers wants to make that, or has gifted that pattern to a family member and needs a sew along video to accompany it. So Harvey is the same as Henrietta. His head and his body and his limbs are all the same, so that will all just be the same as it is. It's just the clothes that vary, and I love making the clothes. Right, so you will need the hat actual bit, this bit here. You'll need then this inner hat as well, and you'll also need your brim. So this piece here is that piece on the top there, 1 and 2, so you're cutting out 2 of those, and you need to have 2. You can't cut on the fold because it's got to have this lovely curve going over the top of the hat. This bit here is the inner hat, which goes from here all the way behind the brim and then comes down to the other side. And then your brim is this bit just here that goes on the front. So we're going to be referring back to this model that we've made earlier. The other thing you'll need is you'll need some stiffener for inside your brim. Now I have I salvage things from all over the place. This is actually curtain header tape that's really, really stiff. Now if you've got a kit from Claire, you'll have whatever you need in the kit, and you'll just use that. If you've only got thin dressmaking interfacing, then you can double pieces up and you can do 2 or 3 pieces, and that will give you some stiffness. But this curtain header tape is great because it is self-adhesive. It does, not self-adhesive, iron-on adhesive, but it does then give you a lovely, lovely shape inside that brim. As you can see by this one, it's just giving it that stiffness, and so it doesn't flop all over the place. Okay, we're going to be making my hat out of my dark green corduroy. Oh, and on this pattern piece for the brim, I've cut that out exactly as the sewing line shown in the pattern. I haven't added any seam allowance for that, and I was able to hold that over the top and just trace round and then just cut it out. Okay, so I'm going to be using this fabric for the green needle cord for the outside of my hat, and then I'm going to be using some more of this fabric because I absolutely love it, that I coordinated with his waistcoat. And that will then finish off his complete outfit. So let's get on. Let's remove this cutting mat, this ironing mat, and we'll get started. Although I might need it to iron my fabric because I'm working from scraps, and you might have fabric from your kit. So whatever you're working with, then just make sure that that's all lying nice and flat. And with corduroy, you need to be aware of where the nap is. So I've got the nap. So a nappy on a fabric is like the grain of a fabric. It depends. One way it feels smooth, which is from my north to south, but from my south to north, if I rub my hand there, it feels slightly rougher. So I'm actually going to have that running down the front. So this is going to be the front of my hat, and this is going to be down to the back of my hat, which is fine. So we can do that. And I'm folding this over enough so that I've got enough to fit all my pattern pieces onto there, hopefully. And we're just going to, by now, if you've been following along with my videos, you'll know that we use the grain line in order to make sure things are straight. We also pay attention to the side here to make sure that we've got our lines going all the way up and that we've not got the wales on, which is the lines on the corduroy, going off at an angle on our fold line. But that's how we make sure we've got our fabric straight of grain. So we've got our top of the hat, we've got our inner hat, and then we've got our brim. Now the inner hat is actually symmetrical. So should you wish, you can actually fold that in half. You see I put the two rounded edges together to give you a folded piece which you can then attach in onto a fold, and in fact that's what I'm going to do, and that will then make sure that that's flat. You could always open this out, but just be aware that you only need one in your top fabric of this inner hat, because the other one will be cut in the lining fabric. So just make sure that you don't open it out and then put it on the fold and have two through double fabric, because you'll be throwing one away because you won't need it. Okay, this is the second piece here, which is the top crown of the cap. And then also I'm just wondering if we can fit that in just there, which we can for the brim of the hat, which we need two of. So if I move this one slightly across, we can fit this all in. Okay, so let's just move that piece for a minute. Let's get this one nice and straight. So we're going to measure from our grain line. So a grain line is the line with the straight line with the arrow on either side, and that wants to run perpendicular or alongside your selvage edge. In this case, we've got these wales on our corduroy, so we're putting it up and down that way. And because point C is the point at the top of the hat here, and I want it to be smooth going backwards, then I'm putting C at the top here where the grain of my fabric is, so that that nap of the fabric runs down nicely down that hat. If you've just got a plain fabric like this one, it didn't have a nap, so I just made sure it was straight on grain, and then that one worked really nicely. Right, so that's 14.5 just there, so let's just put a pin on there before I move it. And then we go to the bottom of the line, and we can extend that one if we want to, and I'm just under 14.5, so I know I need to twist my pattern piece out slightly, which I can do. And there we go. And then I'm going to put a pin down the bottom here. So that piece is now anchored nice and straight, but before I actually work with that one, I'm just going to pop this piece on as well, just to make sure that I can fit all of these pattern pieces in. Now there's no grain line on here, but if you fold the brim in half, because that also is symmetrical, we don't want to cut it out on the fold because we want two of them, and it's easier to cut it out on the double. Then we're going to pop that in and make sure that that folded line that I put down the middle from point C is actually running down one of the wales of the corduroy with the nap. Making sure it doesn't take anything out of the piece next to it. We want to make sure that it's up close to, but not overlapping that piece. And then we then again just pin these pieces on. So I've got some more pins to put in this piece, and I'm going to cut these out. So we want two of the actual hat top of it. We will need two of the brim, but we only need one of the inner. And then we'll talk about doing the same on our fabric for our lining, and we'll get that sorted as well. So back in a minute once I've cut these out. Okay, so back again, and I've got my inner hat and my top of the hat, and we're going to be working with the lining fabric now. So I'm just going to fold this so that we've got, and I'm working with the selvage edge. As you can see, that's what I mean by a selvage edge. Usually it's a printed edge like this. Can just be bound as well sometimes on some fabrics. So I'm just having a little look and seeing what we can work with here. So I want that to go up and down like that. And on this piece, I'm actually going to work with the weft of the fabric, because it will work that way for me. So I can take this piece down slightly. That will work just up there. So I've got enough for that. And then we should have enough for this on here. Okay. So here I can just make sure the selvages are on top of each other and that's a nice straight line. But again, I've got my inner hat is just folded in half. So there it is on point C. And so I'm going to put that onto a fold. And because it's just a small hat, I'm going to go on the opposite way to the selvage for that. But I don't think it's going to matter so much. But, you know, don't send the police out to me, the sewing police out to me. Just be aware that if you've got a directional print on your fabric, it might be challenging to try and make sure that you get that all the right way round if you're working with fabric from your stash like I am. If you're working from the kit, then hopefully Claire's got you a lovely fabric that you can use in that. So let's just do the grain line again. So I can do that 6.5 to the end of the selvage edge, anchor at the top, go down to the bottom of the line, measure again. That should be 6.5, so it's over 6.5. So I need to just swing it out slightly. That's better. That's where we need to be. Pin at the bottom, and then I'm just going to pin this on now and cut it out. Just remember, you don't need to cut out the brim again, because you just need that cut out in your main fabric, the outer fabric, because that's on the same on the front on the brim as it is on the inside of the brim. Okay, so don't cut that piece out, but you need to cut out the other pieces, the other 2 pieces. Okay, I'm going to get on and do that, and then I'm going to come back to you and we'll start talking about how to construct it. Okay, so let's start off and have a quick pattern piece count just to make sure that we know where we are. So these are our 2 inner hats. We've got the one in the outer fabric, one in the lining. This is the top of the cap, and we've got one in the outer fabric and one in the lining. But on these, you know, you've cut out the pattern piece twice, but you've got a left and a right for each one. So as you can see on here, we've got a left and a right for each one because we've cut it on the double. And then we've got our 2 bits for our brim of our hat, and we've got the interfacing. Now the interfacing is without the seam allowance, and that will get ironed on to this section just here on the inside. We'll do that in a second, but as you can see, there's approximately 1/4 inch around the outside of that brim. Okay, so once you've made sure and done your pattern piece count, check up all, you've got all of that. Find your coordinating thread so that you're able to get your machine set up for that. And I would also suggest that you keep these couple of pieces of your pattern pieces together so that you know where you are. I'll try and help you find ways to simplify it, but just keep your pattern pieces close to hand so you can see what you're working on. Okay, let me get my machine ready and we'll get started with the sewing. Okay, so I have got my machine all threaded up and it's ready to go, but before we do that, we just need to iron these pieces here. So take your 2 brim pieces and your brim interfacing piece, and I want you to turn over your 2 brim pieces so that you've got the wrong side up. So I'm just going to give those a little press first, just to make sure that they're lying nice and flat. Don't want to be pressing any creases into them when we attach the interfacing. So that's there. Whoops, iron likes to tip over. So now I'm going to take my brim piece, and because this is adhesive with, you know, it's an iron-on product, then I'm going to attach that onto the front here. So roughly in the middle, well, not roughly, in the middle. And then I'm just going to give that a quick press over, and that glue should then stick to there and hold that tight for me. Okay, that's all that's needed. Right, so let me pop that to one side, because then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take these and we're going to put them right sides together so that we match those up absolutely perfectly. Mine's a little bit hot, so just watch your fingers if yours is too. And because of the thickness of that interfacing on mine, I can only put my pins in sideways, I can't put them in. So I'm just going to put a couple in just to hold it together for me in the right orientation. And although I've put a pin down the bottom here, we're not going to sew down this edge. We're just going to sew around this longer edge here at 1/4 inch seam allowance. So let's get our machine, and we're going to set our machine up with our needle. So where's my seam gauge gone? It's here. And so what I'm going to do is I put my seam gauge behind my needle and hold on to my needle with my finger. Just put my finger to the edge, and then I can then check that my needle at 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimetre seam allowance is on the edge, and it's not. So I've got a button on my machine that allows me to move my needle across, and so that's what I tend to do with mine. And yep, that's about right. So that's good, that's where we want it to be. So what I'm going to do now, it means that when I'm sewing, I can use the edge of my presser foot here as being my gauge. I don't have to draw a line on, or I don't have to guess where I'm going to be going, because as long as I had a 1/4 inch seam allowance to the pattern pieces before I cut them out, and so if I run this side of my presser foot against the cut edge of my fabric, and I've moved my needle across, then that will tell me that that's at the 1/4 inch seam allowance mark, and it just gives you a little bit more accuracy. And when you're doing something small like this, accuracy is really important, because if you're out on your seam allowance or you use a varying one per pattern piece, you're going to get a bit of a lopsided garment, and we don't want that. So let's line up the edge of the presser foot with the raw edge of our fabric. I'm going to do a couple of stitches forward and a couple of stitches back, and then I have the ability to put my needle into my work, which is like that. So every time I stop sewing now, my needle will be in my work. It's a fabulous little thing. If you've not got that, use the hand crank button on your machine here to move your needle down when you stop, because we're going to be doing something called pivoting, because when we're sewing around a curve, we need to get this curve here really nice and smooth, because that's this curve here right on the front of the hat, on that brim. So we need that to be absolutely smart and straight. So we're going to sew until we see that the cut edge of the seam is coming off, cut edge of the fabric is coming away from the side of the presser foot, and then we're going to turn. So let's just do a little bit more. Sometimes you can move it a little bit as you're going, but you'll get to a point where you can't do it anymore, and then you need to leave your needle in the work, lift up your presser foot, and then you can with your needle in the work, you can now spin your work, and you're not going to lose your place. Make sure that's nice and straight, and then you're going to start sewing again until you start to come off again, and then I'm lifting my presser foot again, just spinning the fabric round slightly. You're better off to do more stops and twists than you are sudden ones, because that will make it much smoother. So if you do fewer stops, then it will make your seam edge jerky, whereas if you take the time just to do a few more, then it does mean that it then makes it much smoother for you for the finished result. So I need to pivot again down here. So I'll do that, and then I'm just going to reverse at the end, just to give that some reinforcement. Oops, needle out of the work. Cut our threads, and this is what we've got. Just got that little, just gone over my little bit there. I might just peel that back, and just because it won't fold very well, this deck of it, this very thick interfacing that I've got won't. Okay. So once we've done that, we can take this pin out now, because we don't need that one. That was just to hold these two sides together. And I'm going to take my pinking shears, which are these ones with the triangular blades to them. And I'm just going to neatly just take off some of the edge. I'm not going right up to my stitch line, but I'm going quite close to it, because we need to get this straight for when we turn this round the other way. If you haven't got pinking shears, then you can cut little triangles out with the point of your scissors, and that will do the same trick. Just make sure you don't go through your stitches. If you do, just pop it back into your machine again and just sew just a smidge in towards the brim, and that will reinforce anything that you've got there. Okay, so once we've done that, we're then going to turn this round, so being very careful with it because it's quite stiff. And then we're going to just fold the fabric so that that edge of the interfacing is right on the edge of that brim of that hat. And your raw edges should come together, and mine pretty much do. And where they do, let's just put a pin in just to hold those together, because we're going to just put a little tacking stitch through this just to hold it together. That's all fine there and there. And just here it's not quite holding on, so I can just pull it into place, and then we'll trim it down afterwards. Okay, so once you've done that, then we're going to go to the machine and we're going to sew. The thing I want to say is that it might seem a little bit tedious to take those little triangles out of that edge on that seam allowance, but it's really does make such a huge difference about how flat this cap brim will actually sit. So I would urge you that if you've got the time or you've got the inclination, please do that step, because that will make it sit really nicely when you turn it through. Okay, let's go back to our machine then, and we're now going to just put we're going to go inside the seam allowance, so we're only going to go 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, but I just like to tack these two edges together so that when we're putting the brim into the hat, it doesn't accidentally sort of one side, one raw edge peek out from us. So we don't need to reverse. Let's get it started, and then very close to the edge, And then if we just leave our needle in our work, we can pivot again just to make sure the direction is correct. Take your pins out as you come to them, we don't sew over pins. Tell from my bobbin noise I'm playing a bit of bobbin chicken, but we'll see how we get on. Okay, so I've caught most of that, not quite all of it all the way around, but that's fine. Just as long as those two edges are caught together. Anywhere where you've got, so I've got a little bit here where I've got a one raw edge prouder than the other, I am going to just snip it off so that they're both equal. So I don't want that to catch me out when I'm sewing this together. So just neaten yours up and just have a little look on both sides and make sure that those are all together. Okay, so that's fine. So there's our brim made, all ready to go. So the next thing that we're going to do now, so pop that just to one side because we're just going to need that in a minute. Let's take our outer of our hat now, and we've got a left and a right that look like these, and we're going to put them one on top of each other, and then the longer, more smoothly curved edge is the one that we're going to sew. So you've got one that pokes out and then scoops back in again. That's not the edge we're going to sew. We're going to sew, let me show you on the pattern, from A to C or from C to A, whichever way you want to do it. That's the way that we're going to be sewing it. So from point C to point A is what we're sewing. So let's put our two pieces of fabric together so that they're spot on top of each other. And actually this corduroy holds itself very easily, but pin as much as you need to. And then we're going to put this into the sewing machine, and we are going to be sewing again 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just reverse at the start and the stop. Needle in our work as we're sewing if we stop. Stop for your pins. And then reverse at the end again. Needle out of the work. And we can trim our threads. So once we've got that done, we've got one top piece like this. And this is the start of your cap. So this is the bit that runs from the centre front down the middle of your cap and then forms the back of your cap, if you can see how that's laying on top of this one. So just again, I'm just trying to help you understand the orientation because I think that can make it easier for you when you're actually sewing this at home. So let's get the piece here. We're going to give it a press with the seam just straight first off. And if you're using a delicate fabric, just be careful of your iron temperature, and don't forget you can also use a press cloth if you wanted to. I've got one just here, a bit of a scrappy one, but I've got one here. This one's silk organza, and it just takes the heat out of the fabric. You know, sometimes when you iron something you can be left with a shiny mark on your fabric. Well, that's what we're trying to avoid by using a press cloth. If you've not got any silk organza like this one, you can buy it on the internet quite quickly, or quite easily and readily available. You want a pure silk one. It's not overly expensive either. Then you could also use a cloth hanky, fabric hanky, that they're quite nice and thin as well. Or you can use a pillowcase or a tea towel, but a tea towel is a bit thicker. The beauty of using a silk organza is that you can see through it. So as you can see, I've now opened up that centre seam after we pressed it flat, and I'm going to put my press cloth over the top of my seam, and I'm going to use that to see through to then press the seam sides open like that. But I'm doing one side to the other, because it's a curve, and that's due to the pattern piece, that's due to the curve on the pattern piece here. It's going to put that lovely curve in because that's got to go down the back of your character's head. Then it's not going to sit flat for you on your ironing board or your pressing mat, and that's exactly how it should be. It should curve up because we want that shaping in there, and that's why it's not cut on the fold, because you want that seam to be in there. So just iron it as best as you can. Mine's gone a little bit crooked. I'll just ease that out a little bit more. And then we're going to repeat this process for the lining as well. So you're going to sew that same long thin seam on the lining as well, and then we're going to press that seam open as well, so we're ready to work with those. So we're kind of doing it all in one go because I think it'll be easier then for you to see where we are and what we're doing. So let me get on and get my pieces together for that. So here's my 2 lining pieces. I'm just going to pop those on top of each other, right sides together, and I'm going to start at point C first and put a pin in, and then I am then going to go down to point B and pin that together. Oh no, point A, sorry, point A, and pin that together. So it's point C and point A. Let's put one in the middle as well, just to hold that nice and still for us. And we can go to our sewing machine, 1/4 inch seam allowance. And yes, I am using my green thread, but I think it won't show on the inside of this hat, so I'm happy to use that. So I'm stopping for my pins, making sure my raw edges are together to keep that sizing correct. And where I need to pivot, then I'm lifting up my presser foot with my needle in my work, and I can pivot to make sure we've got a nice smooth curve. Reverse at the end. So let me just take this to the ironing board, and then I'm going to iron the fabric so that that seam allowance there is open, same as we did for the outer. So I'll pop back to you when I've just done that. Okay, so once we've finished, we end up with these 2 pieces of hat like this. They've both got a mound in the middle. They're not lying flat on my work surface. If I can show you, they've got that lovely curve over the top there, and the same with this one as well. It might be easier to see on the lining how that's got that lovely curve in there now. So the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to show you on my lining, but it's going to be exactly the same for the dark fabric because I think you'll probably be able to see better on the lining. So we're going to take our long piece of lining, and we're just going to fold it in half to start off with. And then at both of the fold points here and here, we're going to put a little notch, because that will help us with placement later. So if I open this out, on that fold line there, I've got a little notch just there and one just there, showing that centre front. Because this first notch on the centre front, we're going to take our hat, so I've got the really curvy edge to me and the pointed edge away, but I'm going to turn it round now so that I've got the pointed edges towards me. So again, keeping this orientation so that we know where we are. Find your notch you've just cut on the inner hat piece, and that's going to marry up directly on top of that centre seam that we've just sewn. So let me just put a pin in and I'll show you. So there's my centre of my hat with right sides down, horseshoe shape, sort of facing down if you like. It's like a horseshoe, isn't it? And then the centre front of that horseshoe at that halfway point is right on top of that centre line that we sewed earlier down the outer of the cap there. The next thing I want you to do now, and this is where it starts to have to trust the process, is I want you to locate this point just here. It's point B on both of them, okay? So point B. So locate point B, which is this pointy bit. So it's there's 2 pointy bits, one at the bottom of each end of the horseshoe. So find one first, and then I want you to locate where this pointy section is on the back of the hat here, just here. And you're going to put that together. So you put in point B to point B. But I don't want you to lie it like that. I want you to fold it so that the points, almost the right angles, are right on top of each other. And I'll show you with a close-up just here, look. Can you see how that's lying right on top of there? So that the long curve that goes around the front is following the curve on the hat, on the brim. Not on the brim, we're not even working on the brim, are we? Let me just show you. So point B here, where that right angle is just there, is going right up against point B here. So can you see how that's... So you've got 2 curves going in opposite directions, and that's correct. You've got one here and one going off here. And that's what's happened here on the hat. So Let me show you on the other side as well. We're going to take this long other bit of the horseshoe, find the point on it, not the curve, and then we're going to hold it right up so that the inner curve of your point here lines up against the back of the hat. We're not going to actually sew that bit, we're sewing the other bit, but that's how you need to do it, because you want to have this so that it's on there, but that point there needs to be together. And then just put a pin in just to hold it, because we've then marked our centre point and we've marked our 2 end points. And I think this is where people will have been getting a little bit confused with the actual diagram in the pattern, because it can be difficult to explain. I think the points A and C work. So C is the centre of this piece here, and that goes against that seam that we just sewed before, and that's attached there. So that's this bit here, there's our seam allowance, and there's our notch for point C in place. And then the longer curvy edge is going around the outside. Then what I want you to do, now we have to understand some things first of all. Let me just get my lining fabric just to show you. So I am digressing, but this should hopefully be really important. So remember when we were talking about cutting out the fabric, and I talked about the grain line and how it runs north to south on the fabric in line with the selvage edge, and you can see the bound selvage edge on this fabric here. So what we needed to do, what we've done is that when we've cut out our pattern piece here, part of it starts off on the grain, so it starts off by sitting on the grain, but all of this here is what's called on the bias. And on the bias, there's no stretch at all in your fabric this way, because it's not a stretch fabric, so there's no stretch at all this way, and there's no stretch at all east to west, that's all straight. But if we go diagonally, I want to show you how that starts to stretch. So if we go diagonally, look at how that fabric there is stretching. Can you? Hopefully you can see that those fibres are stretching because they're on the bias. Here, no stretch. Tie it with a scrap of your fabric now while I'm talking to you if you can, and just so there's no stretch that way in line with the selvage, and there's no stretch that way, or very, very little anyway. That's just the weaving stretch, but very, very little. But now if you go at a 45-degree angle, so like at a triangle away from your selvage edge, you'll see that you get so much more stretch in that fabric. Now that can work with you, but also it can work against you, because sometimes we need to stretch out a piece of fabric and we'll have it on the bias so we can work with that stretch. But other times we want to actually bunch that stretch up together and have it really quite dense. And that's what we need to do now with this next section. So I hope that makes sense, just as a bit of a guide, because this section here on the inner hat, which is this section here on the pattern, is all on the bias. So it's got some stretch to it, but it also means it'll contract slightly. So as we're offering up the inner hat to the top of the hat, we need to just make sure that we're not pulling on anything, because this sits together very carefully. So we're going to just start at point C and work around to point B, getting myself mixed up. And as we go, we're not pulling on the fibres to make it stretch, we're actually trying to make sure that those fibres, I'm going to use the word smoosh again, but smoosh together a bit and kind of contract slightly because they're going around this corner. And when you're working on the bias like this, you've got to be really gentle with it all, because we want the cut edges together of our fabric, and you might sometimes get a little ripple on the cut edge because one curve is bigger than the other, and we might have that down here. But when you smooth your hands along the sewing line, which is 1/4 of an inch in from the edge, we want that to be smooth, okay? It's a bit like when you were putting the sleeves in for Harvey and you got the gathering stitches, and some of them had got the gathers in, and then you're putting it against the body of the shirt which hadn't got any gathers in. So when you're placing this, you want to be mindful, that's the word I want, that we're going to be not stretching out this fabric in order to make it fit. So I'm going to put in one now at the back up from point B. So you can see I've got all of this fabric here on one side and then only that much fabric on the other. And you might think this isn't going to fit in a month of Sundays, but we're going to use magic. We're going to use the magic of fabric to make it fit. And we're going to offer those fibres up to each other, those two pieces of fabric up to each other. But then if you kind of use your fingernails, you can move them up closer to each other so that you get a little ripple on the edge where the inner brim is, but it's smooth on the outer. But then when you put your fingers on it, actually those ripples come out to nothing on that stitching line. And that's what we want. We're just easing in, it's called easing in, that extra bit of fabric, because what we're actually creating is this section here on the side of the hat. I don't know if you can see that with the light. So we're doing this really quite tight curve just here. This bit's not so bad, that kind of fits in quite nicely. But we're actually doing this bit here, which is beyond the side of the peak and sort of where Harvey's ear or whatever your character's ear is going to go. So it's that bit that we're doing. But one curve is longer than the other, so we need to keep the raw edges together. And we're using the heat and the flexibility of our fingers to smoosh those fibres together so that they will sit together nicely. And then we're going to put a pin in. It can take a little time to get used to easing things in, so just be kind to yourself. If you have to go off and have a cup of tea, then do that. I'm going to take those pins out and do that bit again and that one, because as I'm finding, we just need to move those up a little bit to make this all work. And when we sew this, we want to sew it without any puckers in. And it might be a good idea to work with your lining first so that you can actually have a practice run before you're working on your outer of your hat. But if you're careful and if you're persuasive with your bits of fabric and your fingers, and you keep your raw edges together, that's really important, then we should be able to put this together. Now, the other thing that I did find when I was doing the other hat, which I've just remembered, is that we can put some little snips in along here just to help that ease in. So where this section is here, just here, this lump here, I'm going to put some little snips in, but I'm actually not putting them in on the fabric of the inner hat. I'm actually putting them in the fabric of the two flat bits that we sewed together. So let's just put a couple of little snips in, only about 1/8 of an inch. Don't want to go as far as your seam allowance. If I just hold that there, can you see those little snips in there? Hopefully you can, because that will help the fabric just lay out slightly and flatter. And I think hopefully you can tell by the time I'm taking to do this that this is probably this is the fiddliest bit of the whole hat. But once you've nailed this, everything else is a doddle, so you'll be fine then. So I've just finished doing mine and I'm happy with that. And what I can see on the other side, so on the top of the hat side, is that there are some puckers around, but on the stitch line, actually there's no creases. So you don't want anything where you've got an actual crease sort of pinned in like that. You want to make sure that when you're looking on both sides, at the point of the 1/4 of an inch inside that seam allowance, you can either sew or you can move your fabric out of the way, and it's going to then give you that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So once you've done that, we're then going to go on to the other side. So let's start off with this point, the point C again, and let's work towards the back of the hat, matching those raw edges and just smooshing those fibres up on that bias edge to make sure that they've not stretched out at all, because you'll be surprised how quickly and easily they do actually stretch out. And as I say, sometimes we want that curve, like on a bias binding, we want that stretch and that flexibility, but on this hat it's what's going to give us the shape, but we don't want it to give us any puckers in it. So I've got about 1/3 of the, well, about half of the way from the edge to there, so that's all fairly flat and just together, that all sits nicely. So then I'm going to come here now, go down to the points that we matched up earlier and just put those raw edges together, and this is where the shaping is. So we're going to push those fibres together on this outer hat here so that they form a little like bubble on the raw edge of the upper hat. because then when I swish them with my fingers, there's one bubble there, look, but when I squish with my fingers, I can't feel any crease underneath there, it's all flat, and that's what you're looking for. So the bubble is inevitable because we've got a longer edge against a shorter edge, but just make sure you're not pinning any puckers in as you sew it. Just use your fingernails or your fingers to just move those raw edges so that they sit nicely together. Make sure you've got your raw edges together. We're going to look a bit proud on me. And again, if this is the first video you've watched of mine, I know you might think I'm labouring the point, and I kind of apologise, and I don't, as I said before, but I want to show you in real time. I don't want to just go, ta-da, here's one I did earlier, because then if you don't see me struggling for 10 minutes with it, you don't know how difficult it can be then, or how tricky it can be. And this might be something you find really easy, and it might be something that it's the first time you've ever done it and you've never had a chance at learning it before. So if you've already got this section, just fast forward. You know, if you've already got this bit, then just fast forward on. This is just a little bit of extra help for those that haven't quite got it yet, or who just need to just see a little bit more to see how this all goes together. And I do take time to explain things, and I'll also tell you what to do with it if it goes wrong as well. So, and I tend to have a bit of a motto: if it's not cut off, then it's salvageable. So we just don't cut off anything until we're sure that we don't need it. Okay, so that one's gone together much easier on that side. Don't ask me why. It's just the law of however things are. But I've got quite a big bubble on the edge of my hem there. Look, can you see that one? But when I put my fingers along that edge at the sewing line, it all smooths out and all goes round. We can still, I haven't had to put those little snips in this side, but we can do just to help us whilst we're sewing this. So I'm just going through the edge of the upper hat, just to give us a little bit, and that'll just help it just spread out, splay out a little bit, just to be able to help us. Okay. I've laboured the point enough. Hopefully, just rewind it if you're not sure and just listen to what I'm saying, and hopefully it will make sense to you. If you can't understand what I'm saying, then have a look at easing in on other people's YouTube videos, and you may well find somebody who explains it in a way that's more easy for you to understand. So when you've finished, this is how it's looking. So this is the horseshoe, if you like, upside down. That's the back of the hat. This is going to be the front and the peak of the hat. But that's where we are now with that upside down. And what I want to do is I want to actually fold it, turn it upside down. So I'm going to sew it with the horseshoe down, because the horseshoe has got, so this is the horseshoe bit, this bit here. I'm referring to it now as a horseshoe. Okay. This horseshoe bit here, I'm going to sew with that flat against the machine bed, because that is the bit that needs to stay flat. That's the longer curve. This is the shorter curve in here, and look how that's kind of wanting to fold up and misbehave. So if we have the top of the hat upwards while we're sewing, then we'll be able to control it better. This is the theory. So the other thing that I suggest you have to hand if you've not got one is an awl, which is like a pointy tool that I use, because that helps for getting underneath. If you've not got that, you can use the point of a quick unpick, but just be careful that you don't cut through your fabric, or you don't make a hole in your fabric with using that. With an awl, it's quite easy because it's just a point. Okay. I'm going to try a slightly different camera angle for this, for one side, and I'll see how we get on. And if not, then I'll revert back to this one. So if it's not worked, I'll have edited this bit out, but hold on a second. So here goes. So I've actually got it in front of me here, so my hands are going to look enormous. But what I'm doing is I'm going to start at one corner down here. So making sure those lines are together, and you can see how those corners are together. And then I'm going to put this under the machine. Now, whereas before we've moved the needle across to the right, this time we're going to move it across to the left, because I want as little of the presser foot as possible to be actually on the actual fabric itself, because it's going to be easier to work with. So if I change my needle position across this way, and I'm going to use, don't know if you can see on there, just take this off a second. There's this section here on my presser foot where it goes from plastic to metal, and that's what I'm going to measure from there to my needle when I'm using this seam gauge. So if I put that bit on the 1/4 inch, I can see that I am slightly too far over. So I'm measuring, can you see how I'm holding, got my seam gauge against sort of like just at the back of my machine, and I can see the half centimetre, 1/4 inch mark is just touching that. So that's going to be my new measure. So let's put this fabric in. Can you see how it's trying to twist? That little corner is trying to twist up. So just make that behave itself. And you pop it down. And I'm now going to sew forwards, just so that I'm just onto the hat itself, and then back, and then anchor my needle in the work, because that's how we want to hold it down. I'm then going to lift up my presser foot and take out this first pin, but I'm going to have my needle here, so that my awl here, so I can hold those raw edges together where the pin was holding them together. Okay, so then I can put down my presser foot, and I'm going to take a few stitches at a time. And my fabric's all bunching up, as you could see. Let me just smooth that out, just make sure that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. And you can see how this top edge of the fabric here is wanting to flick up. So that's where the awl comes in, just to hold it in place. And I'm going to pull the fabric, main top of the fabric here, back, whilst holding onto it with the awl, to make sure that's going to stay flat for me. I'm going to take a couple of stitches closer towards that next pin. Well, the other thing I did think of earlier on was that we should perhaps just tack this in first. And you can feel free to tack it in, because that probably would be a good idea as well. So I'm just going to smooth out this fabric again. Perhaps I'll do this side this way, and then I'll turn it round so that you can see the more traditional way, where you're almost looking over my shoulder. So that's the next bit. So lift the presser foot up again, and now we can just manipulate the bulk of the fabric back there from the top, and expose just the next few stitches. Make sure the raw edges are together. I'm going to take that pin out there now. Hold it together. And you can see how the awl can get underneath that presser foot, whereas your fingers can't. And then change the angle again. Just put this bit here out, straighten it all out. And this is in real time. I've not speeded this up or slowed it down. This is actually how slow I'm going to do this, because this is how we want it. We just want to get it perfect, and it's worth taking that time. So let's take that pin out. So we're almost there to the middle, look. Stop and take that pin out. And this is much easier now as we get round to point C. We can see that seam allowance starting to come forward. So just let me know whether you like this camera angle or not. I think it could do with being a little bit higher, but I'm just experimenting. So again, move the fabric around, and I'm going to need to pivot at this point. So needles in the work, lift up the presser foot, releases the fabric, and then just twist it slightly. And I'm going to just come to the peak here, and then I'm going to change camera angle so that you can then see it from above as well, because sometimes that helps too. Okay, so let me just change the camera angle, and back to you in a second. Okay, so let's see if this angle is any better for some people. So again, I've made sure that I've got it all smooth on the bottom here. I can feel with my fingers that there's no puckers underneath that piece of fabric. So I'm starting from point C, and I'm going to go down to that other side. So let me just, I've not taken the fabric out of the work. You would sew this in one continuous row. I've just followed it through. And my bobbin has just run out. Hold on one second. I told you I was playing bobbin chicken, didn't I, with this one? Hold on one second. So again, we're going to now just pivot. So needle in the work, lift the presser foot, and change direction. Get towards our next pin. I'll take that one out. Making sure our raw edges are together. we're coming down now to this really curvy bit. So let's just take our time again. So we're just making sure that where we are, we've got no puckers. So let's take out this first pin and use our awl to hold those edges together. Goes to the next pin, let's take that one out. Anybody else holding their breath? Me a little bit, but we'll get there, I promise. Okay, and then carrying on straight down and through. Hoping you can see okay. It's difficult to know because the dark light, it isn't dark enough, and the white fabrics, it then whites out a bit. Take out the next pin, but make sure you've got your awl or your quick and pick. So your quick and pick, you can use the point on that just to hold it still as well. It doesn't fall apart on you. Just tuck that fabric under, make sure that we've got our raw edges together best as we can. It's not a perfect world, so we'll do our best. Needle in the work and then lift up the presser foot. Now I've got a crease here of the fabric, so what I'm going to do is hold on to the fabric further down beyond where I'm sewing and take that back, and it releases the pressure on the bit that we're actually sewing. It takes the bulk away, and then when I smooth it down I can see that underneath my presser foot there's no crease there that's going to be sewn in. So a couple of more stitches forward. Sometimes we can only do a couple of stitches at a time, and that's okay, we don't mind that. Lift the presser foot up, move some more fabrics back slightly because this is on the very delicate bit, and I'm going to do a few more stitches forward, and then needle in the work again and lift the presser foot up, and now we're going to manipulate the fabric backwards again. Just keep your eye on it, and then let's take that pin out. And then we're on the homeward stretch now. So just make sure those two corners behave themselves. Doesn't try and sneak out. Because if it's on the bias, it does try to stretch out and then reverse at the end again. Okay, we can breathe. Let's have a look. I haven't sneaked a peek, so let me just have a look. I had to just rejoin my bobbin just there, so that's why that's what the join is there, but you won't have a join there. Okay. So what we're looking for is on this seam here that we've got no folds, no puckers sewn into the fabric, and that's all nice and neat. And then if we go on to the other side, we're looking again to make sure we've got no folds and no puckers sewn into the fabric. And that's all nice and neat. So one side is good. Let's try the other side. So here we've got no puckers in that going round there. And on this side, we've got no puckers going round. So fabulous. This one has worked perfectly. Going slow on these smaller pieces. And if you've got a speed control on your machine, I really would suggest you look at doing that. Or if you can't, if you find it difficult to do one stitch at a time, remember you can always use your hand crank just to move you forward one stitch at a time as you're doing it. And yes, it takes longer, but then you've not got unpicking time and time to have to do it again. If you found out that you have got a pucker somewhere on where you are, don't panic and don't take out all of your stitches and start again, because majority of it I think you'll find will probably be right. What you need to do is locate where your pucker is, and you'll have a little fold that's been sewn into your fabric. Use your quick and pick and take out the stitch directly on top of that fold. Then take out 2 or 3 stitches either side of it, and just use your fingers and see if you can smoosh those fibres together so that it sits flat. If you can, you don't need to undo any more stitches. You'll just start again a little bit before the stitches that you've undone, and sew and finish a few stitches after where you've undone, and that will correct it for you, and that will just get those fibres just to stay down for you. And that's quite common to have to do that, whether it's on a princess seam or something here. I mean, if you look at that curve as to how you've done, look how ruckled this edge here is, which is the one of the side hat, and then look how flat and still that one is. And that's why it's a tricky seam to sew, because you're trying to put those two different edges together. Right, the good news is that's what we've done. The bad news is we need to do it again. So plenty of practice for you, but this time we're going to take the outer fabric, and that's why I said to practice on your inner, because that will be on the inside and you won't see it. So let's see if we can do the same again. So you're going to take your outer fabric and have the big curve, so the smooth curve edge, so it's at the front of you. up, and then the 2 pointed sides here so that they're down. We're then going to take our inner hat and we're going to put those 2 points together, aren't we? So we're folding it in half and we're going to mark that point C on both edges of both sides of that fold, because we'll need those later. Then we're going to put the horseshoe so that it's this way round, the good luck side. No, that's the bad luck side, isn't it? Round, and then we're going to take our notch for our C and we're going to put it up against the seam line on our outer hat. Where's my pins gone? Oh, they're hiding. And let's pin that. I'm going to tack this one as well and see if that's any easier, and I'll let you know whether that's any easier. So then the next thing that we're going to do then is, that's how it's all folding down on ours. We're going to find our point and we're going to match it up to the point just here. So we're just sort of taking it and pulling it to one side so that all matches perfectly, and put a pin at that start point. And then we're going to go over to the other side and find our other point, and we're going to put that so that that then matches perfectly on there too. And if I can get my pins sorted, then we're going to pin that together. So that's what it's looking like at the moment. A bit folded up, I know, but that's how it's looking. Then I start at the edge at the front of the brim, which is this bit here, this long curve, and we're going to start and put that onto the hat, but making sure that we don't stretch out this bias edge that's on either side of here, because that's really important, because that's going to give us too much stretch and we don't want any more fabric than we've already got to try and get into this curve. So raw edges together as you pin round, and I'm going to do exactly the same as I did with the inner of the hat, the lining, in order to put this together. But the difference is I'm going to actually tack this once I've got this together. And some fabrics will be easier to smoosh together than others. So if your fabric's got a fairly loose weave to it, it'll smoosh together better. Cotton poplin is one of the worst ones to try and smoosh together, just saying. Because it's just so stiff and it just doesn't want to sit nicely for you. Okay, so I'm going to do this and then I'm going to tack it, and then I'm going to sew it exactly the same way, but in the interest of saving your patience, I'm not going to make you sit through it all again, but if you need to see it again, then just rewind the video and just watch that again. Okay, so I've got my tacking thread, this lovely orange, which will sew up nicely against the green for you, hopefully. And I'm going to start at one edge and I'm going to tack just inside what I think will be just a slightly bigger seam allowance than 1/4 inch, because if I can get it to go smoothly just there, only minimally, then it will then hopefully sit nicely for you when you come to do it. Of course, if you've got proper tacking thread, I just use ordinary sewing thread for tacking, but if you've got a proper basting thread, then that snaps really nicely, so you don't need to worry. I think that's going to be on my Christmas list. Right, okay. So I'm just doing some stitches like this, just to hold it together. And we're just trying to be careful not to sew in any creases. Just run your fingers along and just see. So I've got a little crease that looks like there, but it's not extending beyond that tacked line, so that's fine. Take your pins out as you go so that your thread doesn't get tangled up on those as you go. And you can sometimes do a couple of stitches together as well. Once you're on that straighter edge, you can. I wouldn't try and do a couple of stitches together on the very curvy bits. And although I don't say to tack all the time, if there's anywhere you want to tack because you feel more comfy, then please go ahead and do that, because it is a really good way to do it. I'm just used to jumping straight in with my pins, I think. I think I've been stabbed that many times now, I almost don't bleed when I get stabbed with a pin, so I kind of ignore it. Which is strange really, because I don't like injections, so you'd think I would do, wouldn't you really, with all these needles that I handle. Right. So you get the gist. I'm just going to carry on making sure my raw edges are together, and I'm just going to go around and just tack the outer hat onto the inner hat, making sure your seam allowances stay open. And then I'm going to tack, so it's just going to look like that on one side, and then it's going to look like that on the other side. But none of those little flutters, if you like, are sewn in at all. So there's nothing crease. If there's a pucker sewn in with your tacking, I guarantee you it'll be sewn in on when you machine sew it. So that's why you just need to take the time to get that nice and flat. Okay, I'll be with you in a second, and we'll carry on with the tacking. Okay, so we've got it tacked, and we can actually see now, you can see exactly how that seam there wrinkles up. But again, on the stitch line, everything's all smooth, so that's all nice and fine, so I'm happy with that. And again, when I sew this, I'm going to stretch that side out, and that should help as well, just with its sewing. So we have that flat inner hat side down. So let's just pop that in and have a go with that. Much easier. I'll put a note on the screen for earlier so that you don't try and sew it with the pins like I did originally, because I do think that does make it a little more challenging. But then that's what I try to do. I do try to let you know when things work out better, if I have a better idea further down the line. And that's what's happened. Let me have my awl again. And we'll just have a go at sewing around here and see. The truth will be in whether we get puckers or not, but hopefully we should be fine. And sometimes just stop and just lift your presser foot up and just release the pressure of the fabric. It really does help, that does, just to help everything all sit nicely. Helping it round the front of the cap, that's all goes nicely. Oops, just lift it up. Oh, I think I've overstrained my spring on my sewing machine. Okay. Just start to manipulate this fabric now to start to move some of the bulk away, and that keeps it nice and flat. Much easier. Right, I am definitely going to put a note on so that you guys will know to tack it first. And hopefully that will save any frustration for you. Right at the end, needle up. All my snips, and then cut that off and cut the starting threads off. Then let's have a little inspection. So, no puckers on this side, no puckers on that side. Let's have a look here. That's all okay. That's all fine. Yep. Oh, we've got no. It's just where it's just it's got an ironed crease in, but it's not actually a pucker, so that's fine. Okay, so again, let's just take out our threads now. So take out the tacking threads, and then we're going to move on to the next step, and that will be attaching the brim. So the brim goes in next into our sewing on our hat. See me fiddling. I need to press the stop button, don't I, and stop fiddling. Shout at the screen. Tell me what to do. Right, okay. I like it when it all comes out smoothly. Just got a couple of threads caught in a couple of places, so I'll just fiddle about with those and get those out, the tacking threads out, so it's all out of the way. And then if you want to grab your brim, that's what we're going to work with next. There's just one thing before I forget. On this curvy edge here, we're just going to use our pinking shears again. So if you've got your pinking shears, now you need to be careful that you hold the bulk of the hat out of the way and only have the seam allowance going forward into under the blades of the pinking shears. You don't want to now go through what you've just beautifully sewn. And I'm just taking off a smallish amount off the edge, but it'll just help that seam just turn through. If you've not got pinking shears, well, that's the seam allowance, isn't it? Just making sure I wasn't cutting through anything. Then you can do the little snips like this, where you do the little triangles and take those out like this. Takes a little bit longer, but it will do exactly the same job. And what you're trying to do is reduce any unevenness or bulk in this seam here, so that when we turn this through, everything all sits beautifully and doesn't look bulky or just lumpy. That's what we're trying to avoid. So if you do that on your lining and on your outer, just trim those seams and then come back to me. Okay, so next thing we're going to do now is get our peak that we've sewn earlier, and we'll work out, let's just turn, I started to say something then, sorry, I was going to say work out which side you want to be up and which side you want to go down, and mine's got a natural bend in it this way, so I'm going to have mine that way, but there's no right or wrong answer, just go with whatever suits you. And what we're going to do first is we're going to just turn our hat round so that the right side is actually out, and you can admire your lovely smooth seams on the sides here that you've just achieved. And we also want to turn the lining out as well, the right way round. So you can see your hat starting to come together. Here's the peak and here's the back where it fits around the back of the head. So we can see that starting to come together. Right, now, remember that we put the little notch on the front of the inner hat. We're now going to take our brim and fold it in half, and we're going to put another little notch just on the edge of the brim. Just a small one, just so that we can see, maybe a bit bigger than that one I've just done. That's better, because we just need to be able to see where that is, because now what we're going to do is, the way that the hat is now is the way it's going to sit. So if you've got a side of the brim that you prefer, make sure that when you offer your brim up to your hat, that you've got the orientation that you want, so that you've got yeah, because that's the way the hat's going to be worn, and so your brim wants to make sure you've got your right side down or your other side up, whichever side you want. They're both the same in the fabric, but sometimes one just sits better than another. We're then going to match up those notches at that C point that we made and put a pin in to hold that in place. I'm going to do some more tacking in a minute. And then we're then going to match the edge of the brim against the edge of the hat here. So we're just then, from that C point, that brim should just, or that peak, don't know what you call it, what do you call this bit? The peak, I suppose. You're just going to just pin that on so that your raw edges are all together. Just do one side first. It can be hard pinning through that thick interfacing. And then come to the other side, and then we're going to then match up the other side as well. Your pins to go through. And then what I suggest we do is we just tack this in place. And what I want you to do when you tack it, just pay special attention to where this peak bit here, this bit here, hits on the side of the hat, because we need to have that nice and secure if that's going to sit in nicely. We don't want it folding out whilst we're actually sewing the lining in. So I always start, if I'm doing this, keep your knot out of the way, because that then makes sure that it's not going to get caught up. But then I do a stitch off the hat, because then I can stitch over the edge of where the peak edge is. Don't let it bunch up like I've just done, that's it. And then come off again and almost do a double stitch just to hold that edge down. And then once you've done that, then you can continue on with your tacking stitches. If you try and do it just under or just over your 1/4 inch, then it should stay out of the way when you're actually sewing your stitches, which makes it easier to remove. But just make sure that you're going through all the layers. You should have 3 layers of fabric that you're going through. You should have the 2 pieces of the peak, which you've got just here, and then you should have 1 piece of your inner hat. There we go. So they don't have to be tiny, tiny stitches, they're just holding stitches just to hold this peak in place. And then at the other end of the peak, I'm going to be doing a double stitch again over the edge of that peak where it just touches into the fabric. And I've found that that works really well just to hold it in place, because sometimes they have just a habit of just slipping out, and then you don't quite catch them then when you're sewing your lining in. Not on this pattern, on a different pattern. I didn't mean on this one, but it's just the nature of how it is. Right, let's take these pins out and I'll show you what we have. So, here's our peak. Oh, that lighting's good, isn't it? You can see that. There's the top of our hat, that's the front. That's the point C that we've been sewing with, that's the centre front. These are the side bits here that we've sewn and done. But there's this double stitch over the edge just there, look. The edge of the peak is here. And there's a double stitch holding that on, and a double stitch just there as well. Okay, now what I want you to do is take your hat and now turn it the wrong way round. So turn it back inside again. So that peak is now inside your hat, okay, and this is the outside of the fabric because you can see your seam allowances. Then I want to take your lining that you've turned the right way round, and you're going to tuck it in. Your reference points to start off with is the centre back seam and the two side seams, okay? So pop that in and just tuck that in the front there. Oh, I tell you what, before we do that, let's just put these side seams on top of each other. So put the two side seams on top of each other, and then just make a snip if you haven't already. Have we got a snip at C already? Oh, we have got a little notch at C. So your other reference point is your C. If you haven't got that notch there already, then pop one in, because we can make sure that that's centre front as well. Let's just pop a pin in there. I think we'll tack this again just to make sure that it's right. And then we're going to match this side seam with the side seam. You can press one way and one the other way, and that helps them sit together nicely. Put a pin in just there. So wherever you get your seam allowances meeting, you can either open up the seam allowances and then put the actual stitch line, the seam line together, or you can put the seam allowance for one pressed one way and the seam allowance for the other for the lining pressed the other way, and then the seams, a bit like quilting, the seams nest in together, and that can give you a nice join as well. And then your centre back seam, which we pressed open, we can just push that together so that's on top of each other. And then a couple of extra pins just around the sides now, just to make sure that this all stays together. And you're just matching the raw edges of the lining against the raw edges of your outer hat. But you have got that brim, that little peak, not the brim, the peak sandwiched in between. I'm trying to think of my terminology, sorry. You can tell I was never a milliner, can't you? So once we've finished, this is what we've got. Let me just, pin go through there. So we've got the lining inside. We've got our brim tacked on the inside just here, but you can't see that because that's tucked inside the hat, and then that's our outer on the outside that's inside out. So that's what we've got. Now what we need to do is we need to remember that we need to keep one section open. So I'd suggest we do our red pin trick. So let me just take that pin out and change it for another red one, because the red pins tell me that I need to start and stop. That's an orange one, that's fine. So the red pins tell me to start and stop. So I'm going to start at one red pin, and I'm going to tack it first actually, because that has worked well for us, hasn't it? So let's do that again. Yes, we are going to have 2 rows of stitching on that peak, but I don't mind that. I'd rather have that and it be easier to handle and to sew than I would take it out. So let's just keep that round. We've already got the double stitch over the edge of the peak, so we don't need to do that double stitch again. I'll take your pins out as you go if you like, and then it's less for you to get your tacking threads caught on, isn't it? Just make sure you've got your raw edges together. Mine's trying to jump up a bit. Tuck the lining back down if you need to. Don't have to be too little, they can be quite big. Just to hold it together. And then we're going to stop at this side here when we get to that other red pin. I'll just do a double stitch at the end of, I'm just going to go just over centre back, because we don't need very much to turn it through. It might turn through quite nicely. So I've got about an inch gap there at the back there that I've left. So I'll tidy my pins away and then we'll go to the sewing machine and then we'll sew this together. Won't be a second. Okay, so here's our hat ready to go. So let's just, I'm going to sew it from the lining side with the outside down. It doesn't really matter which way round you do it. Measure up so you've got your 1/4 inch seam allowance again, and then we're just going to reverse stitch to start off with, and then needle in the work. Okay, so we're just going to now take our time, but what we need to do is we just need to roll this edge towards us as we're working. So if you look, I'm just going to make sure that the first inch in front of my presser foot is flat, and I'm going to sew that. And then I stop with my needle in my work, lift up my presser foot, and then I can just roll a bit more of the hat forward towards me so that that's then going to get sewn without any puckers in it. And we're onto that peak. And then we then roll it, stop and then roll it forward a bit more. And you're just rolling that fabric just towards you each time. And you're only doing about an inch at a time because you're working in quite a small space. But you'll find that it actually works to help you get a good finish on this tight little hat here in this hat. I mean, of course you can hand sew this as well, and the instructions are just the same if you are hand sewing to machine sewing, so that's all fine. Just trying to keep that so that there's no puckers forming on the outside. Where we started, just make sure the lining's line nice and flat. And then I'm just going to reverse. And the rule of thumb is that a smaller hole to feed through can sometimes stretch your garment, but if you go too big, sometimes it makes it more noticeable when you actually come to try and hand close that gap. So just bear that in mind. I've left about an inch there, just over an inch maybe, and that's fine. So the next thing we need to do then is we're going to take out our tacking stitches. So let's just take out those. And we've got 2 lots on that peak, remember. We'll take them out together if we can do, or we'll take them out one by one if they are a little resistant. Coming out quite nicely actually. And you might get some where you've sewn through them with the sewing machine like I have just there. I'll show you what to do with those in a second. Let's get out as many as we can to start off with. I hope you've enjoyed sewing along with me today. If you have and you're not a subscriber, I'd love it if you would become a subscriber. It's just nice to know how many people I've got following me. The other thing is that if you leave a comment, I always appreciate that and I always answer. So hopefully you'll be able to let me know whereabouts in the world you are that you're watching this video. But you can also share it with your friends, or you can leave me a comment and say, or give the video a thumbs up if you're able to do that on your device. That also really helps my channel because it helps push my videos out to other people who might be interested in the videos and spreads the love of Lilly Rose Dolls, doesn't it, to other people. Right, so we've got a few here where they won't quite pull out. So what you have to do in this situation is you just have to snip them off close to where it's got stuck on one side only, and then the other side just pulls clean out. It's just where the sewing machine needle on the machine has actually pierced through the threads of the twisted threads of your thread, and it just creates a little knot at that point then. So that's what you have to do. You just snip it on one side and then it should pull out quite easily. Because you then gives it sort of less room to be tangled, I suppose. But yeah. Okay, let me just get these last bits out and then I'll come back to you. Okay, so I've got my tacking threads out, got a little bit of thread left over, but that's how it rolls sometimes. And then what we need to do now is just reach inside through our gap, and we're going to, I tend to reach in with my thumb, and then you're going to feel for where your peak is, because that's the best first bit to try and poke through your hole. So let's find the little peak brim, not brim is it? It is the peak of the cap, isn't it? Push the peak through. Just be gentle because we don't want to stretch this opening too much. So we just keep turning this hat all the way round, inside out. If anybody's done any bag making, then you're used to trying to squeeze things through smaller holes like this. Just want to make sure we've caught that brim in nicely, which we have, so that's all good. Start to get it into its shape. And at the bottom, so here's the hat, so you can see that that's now looking how it should. It needs a bit of a press, so don't worry about that, we'll give it a press in a second. But now what I want you to do is just to start and finger press on these edges here. So you want to have it so that the transition to the lining for the outer fabric is just right on that edge. If anything, you want just slightly edge of your outside fabric to show on the inside. So you've got like a little like edge, because you don't really want to see your lining on the other side of your hat. So let's go to where that brim is, that's all fine. Let's do this bit just here. Just make sure you get right on that edge. Just use your fingernails for now just to press it, and we'll go along to the ironing board. And then where your opening is, you're going to turn in the outer fabric to the inside by about 1/4 of an inch, and you're going to have your outer line, so your lining fabric turned in by about 1/4 of an inch. So you're mimicking the seam allowance on the rest of it, and that will give you 2 folded edges here. And then if you get a needle and thread in the same colour as your garment that you're sewing, we're going to do a little ladder stitch just to close this, because that's the easiest stitch, I think, to try and close this to make it invisible. And if we do nice little stitches, you only need a single thread, you don't need it to be double. Just put a knot on the end there. So now where's our opening? Oh, I can't see it now. There it is, right, okay. So we're going to first of all take our needle through the opening and come up just a couple of stitches into our outer fabric, just beyond. So there's the start of where my outer fabric is, just there, look, and lining, and I'm coming out just a little bit in front, because then we can do a couple of stitches there just to anchor our threads first before we start actually stitching this together. Just make sure you're not taking more than your 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, because that will alter the fit and the way that it all lies. Just hold it between your thumb and your finger like that, so you've got something to work to. We've got a bit of a thread out there. So I will now take a couple of stitches just through the outer fabric where my thread is nice and camouflaged. I just need my glasses actually, help me see. Of stitches through there, and then I start to take a stitch through the lining fabric only, just a few fibres, and then a stitch through the outer, just on that fold line where I've got them held together with my finger and thumb, and then a stitch directly across on the lining side, and then a stitch where that one comes straight across, just come straight across from where the thread's coming out, and just take a couple of threads on the outer. And I've found that by just taking those, doing the stitch in 2 steps rather than trying to go through both fabrics at the same time, it will help it just sit flatter and makes it almost invisible. Well, we want it to be pretty much invisible, don't we? And I think there's only going to be us who know that there's an opening just there. Everybody else will just think it's magic, the way this hat has come together. There we go. And I'll just go a couple of stitches past the end of the seam into the machine stitching. And the reason I do that at the start and at the end is because I think it takes the pressure off the hand sewing thread when you've done that. And it can just reinforce it, because you're going past slightly to where the machine stitching is, and that tends to be a little bit stronger, doesn't it, than our hand stitching. So there we are past now. So now I'm into the dark at the back seam here, and I'll just do a few little stitches just almost on top of each other, or just moving along, and you'll be surprised how strong they are. And with this matching thread you really can't see it at all. And then when I'm ready, I'll just snip it off. Can leave a long tail if you want to. Right, I think it's time for a quick press and get this all into shape, but it's looking good. Let me just get my ironing things and then I will be back. I'm just waiting for the iron to heat up. I'm just making sure that that lining is sitting nicely inside that hat there. We can see that it is. That's looking all lovely. And then just on the edges here, we want to just make sure that that lining is just pushing into the hat. And you can only do a small section at a time because of the circular nature of it, of the hat. So I'm starting away from the brim just to start off with, and I'm just working with about 1 inch at a time, just making sure that that's all nice. And if you wanted to, you can also pin into your pressing mat as well, so that you don't have any have to have your hands near the steam. It always works really well, I think, especially on these wool pressing mats, these tight, the smaller ones. And it'll work well. It'll work on your ironing board as well if you've got a cloth cover on it. Okay. We're just looking to get a nice turned under edge, because we don't want to see any of that lining, if we can help it, on the outside. Now where we're coming to this actual peak here, I'm going to use a press cloth, because I don't want my corduroy to be marked at all. So I'm just going to lay that inside and just use the nose of the iron just to push that lining inside. So it goes inside like that. And now I'm just going to re-get the shape on the outside here. I'm going to give it a little press just on the edge here. But again, because we're working on the outside of the fabric, I've just got my press cloth again, just to help that keep that shape, just to iron that shape into it. Let's come down this side now. And I have actually made a child's hat this exact same way, with all of the seams and what have you, and the lining. So when I've said before in my videos, that the skills that you learn when you're making these characters is exactly as the skills that you would learn if you were making adults and children's clothing. So you know, those skills are totally transferable to other disciplines, really, other than just toy making. So don't think it's a waste of time. In actual fact, it's easier with adult or children's clothes because they're bigger, so you've got a bit more room to work with sometimes in those fiddly corners. Right, okay, moment of truth. Come here, Harvey, let's have a little look at your hat on you and see how that looks. Oh, look at that. That works nicely, doesn't it? And this is just now down to design how you want it to be. I did try putting a little stitch on the first one I made, just to hold the peak of this part of the cap here against the peak, but it didn't seem to help at all. But I might resort to doing that again, because it's trying to separate at the moment. But yours might be sitting just right. Fits his head nicely. Nice little bit of to the side there, nice bit of slant. Sorry, I just had to sneeze. There we've got him. Doesn't he look smart? Absolutely adorable with his hat on, look. So let me turn the camera around and we'll have a little bit of a roundup, because that's the end of stitching Harvey. He's actually now completely finished, and I'm absolutely thrilled with him. So let me turn the camera around and we'll round up. And so we're all done. Harvey is now completely finished with his lovely shirt, waistcoat, jacket, trousers. We can pop his hands in his pockets for that little extra amount of swagger. and I hope you've enjoyed stitching along with me today. I've certainly enjoyed making the hat, cap, whatever we want to talk terminology at, because it really does finish him off beautifully. There he goes. Lovely amount of attitude with that hat on. Just need to learn how to place it correctly with his hands in, and of course he absolutely stands up as well. So I'm not holding on to him, he's standing, which I love about the Lilly Rose Dolls as well. They really do make a fabulous display. So yeah, I'm really thrilled with that. As always, my thanks to Richard and to Claire of Lilly Rose Dolls for sponsoring. I have used my fabrics out of my stash for this, but I was gifted the pattern, and so well, I was gifted the little bit of ribbon as well for his neck, but I'm and the buttons. But I really want to say a big thank you to them, because they are helping me and supporting my channel by allowing me to bring these sew along videos to you, and I really hope you do find them to be useful, either to see it being made, or if you're a beginner, to learn how it's made. I think that's always a really helpful thing. If you're a visual learner, then sometimes the written instructions just won't compute, and I understand that completely. So I'm very happy that I'm here and able to help you. So there's Harvey in all of his glory. So what's next? Well, I've got pattern for the holster trousers, and I've got the duffel coat as well to make. Then I'm on to Henrietta the Hedgehog as well. So again, if you're following along with me, or those are any of the things that you're looking for, then great, because you'll be able to see those. I've also got Lily and the Lamb, and I can't wait to start her. And then I've also got, oh my gosh, what's his name? Can't think, I'll put it up here, the Highland Cow as well, the male Highland Cow with those button front trousers. So I've also got him as well to make. So yeah, we've got lots to keep us occupied. Oh, and I've got a ragdoll as well. There's Rosie the ragdoll. I'm going to, she's not on the website at the moment, so I'm hoping that Claire might put her on the website for when the video goes live. I'll have to ask her nicely. But if there's anything you want to see, I'm rabbiting on, sorry. If there's anything you want to see, then please either drop me a line or message Claire directly and ask her to pop the kit over to me, or the pattern over to me, and I'm sure she'll be happy to oblige, and then I can do the videos to show you. You do just have to bear in mind that real life happens too, so I can't always guarantee when the videos will be out, but I'll do my very best to get them done as soon as I can do for you, because I thoroughly enjoy making these little characters as well. So on behalf of Harvey and I'm going to say a really big thank you and for watching, and I hope to see you soon. So take care everybody, happy stitching, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.